Peace and blessings, everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone to Sankofa Video and Books, right here in Washington, D.C., the nation's capital. We've been serving the community as a Pan African sanctuary since 1998. Originally, this establishment was started to distribute the film Sankofa, which came out in 1993 and is a movie by film director Haile Garima and producer Shirikiana Aina Garima. If you look above my head, that's the two of them, the lovely couple that own this establishment. And today we're here to have a virtual discussion on the book, The Hopeless Romantic, The Untold History of Ethiopia. Our guest this evening is Deacon Dawid Muluneh, who is an Ethiopian American. He is a deacon in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. He teaches Sunday school with the young Orthodox Tawahedo Church community, and he is very active in the DC community. Uh, he is a scholar, and he also is a published author. Has other books. He also has several educational videos on YouTube that I'll let him talk a little bit more about his background. But a prolific brother, and we're happy to have him here.
Thank you for having me.
So, Deacon, if you could just tell us a bit about yourself and just let the people know who you are and how you came to doing this work.
Well, once again, it's really humbling to be invited on this show. I'm a big fan of Sankofa. I grew up in the DC area, and I remember as a kid we used to go to the shop and look around the books and really be fascinated with everything that it had to offer. So it's a major, if you're in the DC area, I highly encourage you guys to go and check it out. I came to America at the age of 8, and I think I grew up like a regular, kid like everybody else. And it wasn't until I started growing up I started asking, what is this Ethiopia about in my tradition? And when I used to go to my local Ethiopian Orthodox Water Church at St. Mary Orthodox Church, that's when I developed this love for the community and the church, and I started serving. And shortly after going to Virginia Tech and getting a degree in mechanical engineering, I kind of left that world behind and went to a monastery in Ethiopia, Debre Libanos, for a year and a half to get further education of the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition. Then shortly afterwards, I went to Catholic University and I got my master's degree. And now I look forward to starting a PhD program at Howard University in the African Studies program.
Yes, we'd love to have you there. I'm a graduate of the Howard African Studies Department, a master's student. I got my master's degree in 2019, so it's a family affair, and we're happy to have you join. Um, at some point, I would like to talk about a little bit later in the conversation, talk about your graduate studies and some of the hurdles you came upon that even caused you to write this book and then to switch gears and directions. That would be interesting to discuss. So I want to get started with the title of the book, "Hopeless Romantic: The Untold Story of Ethiopia, the Untold History of Ethiopia." How did you come upon that title?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was so the idea for the book came at a very um a kind of difficult period in Ethiopia's politics and current climate. For those of you who may not know, for the past year and a half or so, Ethiopia has been in the middle of we could even call it a civil war, with multiple sides being engaged in very sad situations. And I'm being very vague in my descriptions because all sides have their version of their story. And me being a deacon of the church, I don't want to take a side and support one group over the other, but I decided to kind of write a book that would merge everyone together and bring everybody um, to unify everyone. And me being a deacon in the Ethiopian Orthodox Water Church, I minister to the youth, the young people that are throughout America. And for the first time ever, I saw people that grew up here that, some of them have never even been to Ethiopia, being divided according to ethnic lines um, tribal lines, which to me was just not acceptable. So initially, my focus was to write a book to kind of get their attention, and I thought to myself, what do young kids love to talk about? Is, well, romantic relationships. So I thought that, and me being a child, a student of poetry, that's what I learned in the traditional school. There's a traditional poetry known as kene. I used the metaphor between the love of a husband and a wife in order to talk about my love for Ethiopia. And that allowed me to enter into many facets. For example, I can talk about how a husband and a wife might dispute over a particular thing, but that one particular fight doesn't define their entire relationship. And I was trying to propose to the community that, yes, it's true, we are fighting, but this fight shouldn't define our entire history, our entire relationship as a country, as a nation. So, using this kind of idea of the metaphor for a love between a husband and a wife, I go through the chapter and recount various parts of history and highlight various things that I wish to highlight.
Now, it's a number of things that you talk about, and I wanted to get into different ones. And I noticed in the beginning part of your book, you mentioned that a lot of young Ethiopians previously were not very engaged with politics and things going on in Ethiopia, and you gave some hypotheses as to why maybe nowadays people are a lot more engaged. Um, you said something to the effect on page 15. I'm gonna read it. The second paragraph. It says, um, however, what you said. When growing up in Virginia, I can attest neither my friends nor I took much interest in social justice, humanitarian works, or political affairs in any part of the world, much less Ethiopia. However, perhaps because of the permanent impression recent revolutions such as Black Lives Matter and Me Too have had on the West, young Ethiopian diasporas in the West have become widely interested in the country and are involved in the recent affairs. And you talk about the disputing position. So, what do you still feel that way, and how do you think that these social movements are impacting the way that young Ethiopians are engaging with the country?
That's a very good question. So, I would say, and maybe this is controversial to say, but I do believe and I stand behind it. I think as Ethiopians, I believe that we are black, but we do have a different story to tell than, let's say, African Americans, right? So we all are Africans, but there is a different trajectory that we come from. So when you have someone like first or second generation Ethiopian person coming to America, they're not as sensitive to racial issues. In fact, I could say we're ignorant to the issue, not aware of it. It's not like our parents are teaching us about the history of slavery. We don't grow up hearing about that. So we're oblivious. We come from Ethiopia, we come to America, and all we know is, hey, we're in a different country. We're trying to speak the language. We're eating, the burger and the food, and we're just excited to be Americans. And I think most of our energy was spent doing that, that we never really woke up to this injustice that we hear about. I went to Virginia Tech, and that was a 3% black population. And I remember there was a community of African Americans complaining about racism and stuff. And for me, it wasn't an issue for me. It wasn't something that I thought would bother me, affect me. You go to school, you get a grade, and the other stuff. It wasn't, I guess, my story. Of course, this is the problem, right? You don't get it until it starts affecting you. You see the problem of what it is. But I do think Black Lives Movement brought it to your attention that you couldn't ignore it anymore, and people became more sensitive about social justice and the Me Too movement. People became heightened to these issues, whereas otherwise, I think we were just kind of passively watching the world go by, and we were just more excited about being Americans and transitioning over to new life, new society, new friends, and that kind of kept us occupied for a while. But these new movements made us very sensitive and aware that the world is not as pretty as once we thought. And then with that kind of motivation backing everybody up, when you see issues in your country, I think people felt like they were obligated to speak up, and I think they are obligated, and they should speak up. I think the matter of which we speak, the way that we do it, should definitely be reconsidered. But I think it's a good thing that young people care about social justice. I just think the matter of which it was being conducted could have been refined a little bit more.
Yes, yes. And I wanted to talk about that. You mentioned that you saw a lot of vitriol online between, young Ethiopians or Ethiopians of all ages, whoever was posting online, and people really saying some really nasty things to each other. And that was one of the motivations for you to come up with this book. So, and even some comments were directed towards you. So, I just wanted you to talk about that. Have you seen any change in that? Because this book came out, I believe last year. Have you seen a reduction in any type of change in the way people are speaking to each other?
I think, well, at this point, I think everybody's kind of tired and beaten up. But if you still do say something, I mean, people will say very, very nasty things. And the one comment that really threw me off was, uh, again, as a deacon of the church, people became so divided that there was a certain group of people that wanted me to speak up using the church platform to take a side, and explain why certain killings were justified or certain things were justified, or to explain why certain things were happening. And then other groups felt like I shouldn't have said anything and I should have kept quiet. And I think these two extremities, I just don't think is the right thing. I can talk about unity and peace and love. And I remember the first one of the first sermons that the first yeah, it was a sermon, was a call for peace and prayer. And the reason why this hurt was it was a person I knew, and they were a mentor. They were older than me. It was somebody I knew, and they commented. Granted, they deleted the comment soon afterwards, but the comment said, "If you're interested in praying, close your doors and pray." The message being I shouldn't be talking about prayer in public about issues that were related with Ethiopia. That really stuck with me. It hurt. Forget about the negative comments. Saying things that are unnecessary. So that really disturbed me. And again, kids were sending me screenshots of "I'll never speak to you, don't ever speak to me," and "I don't want to see you," and all because maybe they chose a particular political party, or because they sided with a certain political leader, or they disagreed with your theory about how Ethiopia should be run. All because of this, you were marginalized, and you were, put in a group, and that's not how we should behave as a society. I think you can have discussions, disagree with people, and understand you're disagreeing with an idea and not the person. The person is not bad. I don't think people are bad for disagreeing with you.
Yes, yes. A very sobering perspective, and one that definitely promotes unity and peace. I think we need more of that in the world, personally. Um, Before we get into the nuts and bolts of the discussion, I did want to touch on something that was very interesting to me. You talked about your upbringing, and I think I might just need to read this exactly. Um, okay, I might have to paraphrase this. So, you were mentioning that there's many people who are in a way you said there's a overly nationalistic narrative of the country, and that overly nationalistic narrative of the country in a way made you and others, kind of in a way reject the history, and kind of growing up, you're like, oh, this is a little bit over the top here. kind of a certain, what did you say? You said there was a combination. I'm paraphrasing that. There was a combination of we are better than everyone else type of mentality, and also the we come from a very impoverished country mental. So it's like those two thoughts, those extremes, in a way being projected out, and then having a lot of the youth here kind of rejecting both and just kind of assimilating in a way. So,
Yeah.
what was that
So
like? Can you explain that?
sure. So if a lot of when we were growing up, uh, Ethiopians are very proud to be Ethiopian, and I'm talking about the older generation, especially, right? So when we came here in America, we would be I don't want to say doctrinized, but it was kind of like that. Like Ethiopia is the best, it's the great, it's the best, it's the great, and that's all we would hear. We would hear that at home with our family members and at church. When we went to church, Ethiopia is the great, it's the best. But as we were growing up and we were becoming Americanized, if I could use that word, then we look over to Ethiopia and what we see is people being impoverished and people starving. So we're like, where's the greatness in this? So anything after that we heard, I think we started without knowing it subconsciously, just kind of turning it off and saying this can't be true and being disinterested from the Ethiopian history, Ethiopian politics. I know that was true for me. If Ethiopia is so great, why did we come to America? Right? So I couldn't understand this idea of like why people felt the need to say we are great, we are great, we are great when we're in America and we're living here. At the same time, I go on to argue that I think this idea of like, we are great, we are great, we are great comes from insecurity of thinking we're not that great. So you over emphasize the point of our greatness because really you're insecure that we're from a third world country, we are poor, and you'll hear comments like um hey, what did you think from Africa? Of course, this is what to expect from Africa. Or you hear people arguing and say he still thinks like an African. These are two Africans speaking, and my question, what's wrong thinking like an African? He still thinks he's back home in Africa. So what? That's a good thing, right? So in one sense, we have these negative things that we project without even knowing what we're saying. And I've even heard people making fun of each other's accents as if it's a measure for intelligence. Like he can't pronounce this word correctly, and then, or he's FOB, fresh off the boat, as if it's somehow better or cooler to be more like the American, whatever that means. So, in a way, we Africans as well, I don't think we recognize how much we are kind of self-hating, right? And then I think I'm not a psychologist, but in order to compromise for that, in order to like address this point, we find the need to over compromise by saying Africa is the best, Ethiopia is the best nation in the world, right? To kind of deal with these two paradigms. So I think that's just a theory I proposed, but I think there's something going on there worth looking into.
Yes, yes, yes. Very, very interesting. I think that definitely sets the stage for a robust conversation. And my question would be, and I will leave you to be able to speak, extensively on this one, is um, the untold history of Ethiopia. Um, how did you how did you come across? How did you start studying the history of Ethiopia, and then how did you find this untold history? And if you could give us, and definitely we want some examples of some of the untold history.
Sure. So, when you come into the Ethiopian tradition, you hear a lot of oral tradition, maybe things that cannot be proved through scholarship or anything like that. But you would hear oral traditions like the Ark of the Covenant is found in Ethiopia. The part of the piece of the cross of Jesus is found in Ethiopia. Again, these are things that cannot be proven through scholarships, but through the Ethiopian tradition. This is often what you hear growing up in Ethiopia, which when you grow up, you're like, is it really like the Ark of the Covenant? Is it there? So you kind of dismiss everything, right? And then you think everything that you hear about Ethiopia is just false and not. inaccurate. Um, then, when after coming back from the monastery, I joined Catholic University. I was very surprised to see that there was an Ethiopian studies program at Catholic University, where they have hundreds and hundreds of manuscripts. Um, and when I was there at the time of right before I started writing this book, and I was in the program, so part of my program was reading articles and and books written by mainly Westerners, and I was very shocked to find that these Westerners wrote amazing things about Ethiopia. Um, and some of the things that are noteworthy is that, for example, were writing that with their own alphabet, starting from the fourth century, which is really amazing. And to give a little bit perspective of what that means is, even Arabic. When we think of Arabic, it's used almost throughout the world. It wasn't written. The Arabic language is not believed to have been written until right before the advent of Islam, which is in the sixth century or so. But Ethiopia started writing before that. So writing in the fourth and fifth century is tantamount to the space race today. So imagine, in today's world, where Ethiopia was going to Mars and coming back, right? It was that kind of innovation that it had. Ethiopia was rich. It was trading with other nations and empires, ivory, gold, and silver, and so many other things. A historian, or a historic figure known as Mani, in the second century, said the four greatest empires in the world are Rome, Persia, China, and Aksum, being Ethiopia. There were many monuments that have been erected by these Ethiopians from the first, second, third century that's worth writing about or reading about and learning about. So this was a great, mighty region and country, very vibrant, very alive. And I just didn't know this. And these are things that you can kind of find through research, and prove it through whether it's inscriptions or other means of doing research. So I was surprised that, this, we're talking about Africa, this so-called Africa, that produced nothing, this like really really bad that in the first, second, third century was being compared with Rome. And I think that's noteworthy, and I think that's pretty interesting. And we don't hear about this in our school systems. We hear about Rome, we hear about Persia, sometimes about China, but never about Aksum, right? Never about Africa and the great nation and the great things that it did. And I should have mentioned, even in the school system, I think it's particularly interesting how we have history, and then we have African history and African American history. Why can't the history just incorporate everything, right? Why, the what they mean by history is European history, right? Western history. But they just call it history. But you never hear European history. They just call it history. But then the other ones are sub history almost. So they're called African history, African American history, and so on and so forth. I just think that's interesting. But yeah, so I mean, I could keep going. There's so much that was produced in just the first couple of centuries.
Yes, yes. If you could, if you could, um, tell us what you hope. So what? So tell us what you hope people will learn from getting this book. And actually, I guess my question would be, what are your goals? We will have time for Q&A in about 15 minutes. We'll do Q&A. But I wanted to know, what are your goals for the book? Is there a message? Who is the audience? And what is the intent?
Right. So the book, I can kind of divide it into two parts. The first one is, again, I wanted to bring awareness to Ethiopia and Africa in large, of like, there is something we contributed to the world, and I don't think it's getting enough light. I don't think it's getting enough attention. So that's kind of the first part of the goal of this book. The second part is unfortunately a lot more grim and a lot more sad and disappointing to read about. So this history that I'm reading about was oftentimes written by Western scholars, especially in the 1930s and 1940s. Now, if you know that time period and you know history, that's the time where fascists came to Ethiopia to colonize Ethiopia. And I was very surprised to find that these so-called historians were actually fascists that entered Ethiopia with the purpose of colonizing Ethiopia. And anyone who knows about colonization, the way that you colonize a country is, of course, the very famous saying, divide and conquer. And the way that you divide the people, they had to study the people to colonize them. That's a quote from this historian known as Carlo Conti Rossini. Let's study the indigenous so we can learn how to colonize them. So a lot of these studies that were conducted, similar to how the Nazis were doing research on the Jews to learn how to exterminate them, they were doing studies on the people of Ethiopia so that they can learn how to colonize them. Now, this in itself is noteworthy and worth learning about. But what is sad is these so-called research, this research that was conducted by these colonizers, ended up in universities across the world. And today, I'm not saying back in the day, today they are being read by Western scholars as authoritative sources for Ethiopian history. Now, here's what the problem with that is: the methodology of doing research in the 1930s was used in order to fracture the nation and divide the people into small pockets of people so that it could benefit the fascists and they can learn how to colonize them. So, because this is the methodology, I argue in my book that today's scholarship in Ethiopic studies follows that blueprint that was set up by the fascists and similarly continues to exacerbate the division and separation that already exists. Let me tell you a very disappointing reality in Ethiopia. Right now in Ethiopia, there is no current undergraduate history department in Ethiopia. There is no undergraduate history department in Ethiopia. Keep it in mind, in Ethiopia right now, the war, the conflict is about history. People are fighting about history. It's this tribe did this tribe did that. It's about history, and there is no history department for the undergraduate program. There is, however, a philology department. Now, if you're not familiar with what philology means, it just means the study of languages within manuscripts to understand history. Essentially, it is a history department. But this philology department was instituted in 2004 by the name of Paolo Marassini. And if you could guess by the name, this is an Italian name. And Paolo Marassini was taught by a fascist by the name of Carlo Conti Rossini. So in Ethiopia right now, the only sources for history in the university level is from a department instituted by Westerners, Italians, who themselves got their roots from fascists. So the articles that are produced are divisive. Some of the articles are divisive. Some of the articles, I argue, is dangerous to the community and misrepresent the community. Therefore, when young people, young Ethiopians are picking up these articles and reading it, they're believing it and accepting it as authoritative figures, and they continue to fight with one another. I know that was a long rant, but I think
That
this
was
is a very
perfect.
important point to kind of illustrate.
No, that was. I think that's the crux of the whole conversation. To be honest, I think we've gotten to the climax of the conversation. There's a book. I see some interesting parallels between the African American community as well. There's a book called the White Architects of Black Education, essentially. I mean, when you look at the education system and how it's set up, even among historically black colleges and universities, they're much so beholden to to white benefactors who, in a way, control the scope of the conversation and direction of the conversation. And so, even when we're in a perceived independent space or sovereign space, like a Howard University or like a Ethiopia. These are perceived places of sovereignty in terms for Black intellectual thought. You see that even at the highest level, it's being in a way directed by out from direct it's being directed by people outside the community who have their own ends and want to maintain power really. And so I see these interesting parallels. We do have, yeah. If you
Yeah,
want,
I was gonna say, my disappointment with the Ethiopic Studies program is, that's mainly being conducted by Westerners, and usually white men. Is they There are two groups, I'll say, within Ethiopic studies. One is and I don't use this word negatively, but seriously, is they're ignorant. They're unaware of the effect of the legacy of colonization and fascism within the scholarship of Ethiopic studies. And I'm very forgiving to this group, because if someone doesn't know, you educate them. And then there's another tier of scholars who want to defend why they want to continue to honor and celebrate these fascists who wrote about the history of Ethiopia. I don't want to mention names on this air, but there's this one particular what leading figure of Ethiopic studies that went live on a discussion that I was having, and argued that these fascists that wrote about the history of Ethiopia were born before fascism, so they can't be to blame. Well, they, they were war criminals that were, their work is very well known, and what they did is very well documented. They wrote that they wanted to colonize Ethiopia, and yet, leading scholars are defending uh, these fascists and looking the other way and continuing to use the same methodology that these fascists used of dividing the people through their research, some knowingly, some unknowingly. And I'm less so forgiving for the scholars who are doing this on purpose.
yes, yes. We have two questions here in the chat. Oh, Miles's question came up first. Um, and then we'll get to Stacy's question. But it says, "Do you see parallels between the rise of fascism today in Western Europe and America, and Ethiopians' place in the world stage?"
Yeah, I'm glad that question came up. So I would say in America, we this is what we call neo-fascism, right? So a little bit more subtle, a little bit more harder to detect, right? So the face has changed. And Ethiopia, and I can't speak about the rest of Africa, but in Ethiopia, this is not neo-fascism. It is fascism. It is the same method that entered in the 1930s that expanded. The method has not evolved. In other parts of Africa, we talk about neocolonialism. There is no neocolonialism in Ethiopia. What happened in Ethiopia is they entered the land and decided through scholarship to kind of control the people by dividing it according to ethnicity, language, and religion. That's how they were going to divide it. That same methodology exists today. I can't call that neo-colonialism. I call that colonial, the same colonialism. It didn't evolve. There's no 2.2 colonialism in Ethiopia. It's the same one that entered that just stayed. So this is why I am, I guess, surprised, and I think the world needs to know what's going on, especially with Western scholarship and um, in school systems. I was on Twitter, and I read somebody shared a tweet with me about, like, if only people knew in the educational systems how these professors really can destroy someone's career for talking about race or something like that. And I didn't think that was real until I kind of witnessed a portion of it, right? So they will come after you. You will be blacklisted. No one will take your work seriously, because you're essentially working talking about the same people that are publishing or writing. especially when you're in a small field. So it is unfortunate. But I do think we need to shed light on it. But again, back to Miles' question, I think there are some differences because in America, I do see it's not that we can't talk about the same fascism that existed back in the day, but here in Ethiopia, the same mindset that entered Ethiopia is just now at the university level and being conducted that way.
That is when you said that there's no undergraduate history department in all of Ethiopia, a country of over 100 million people and several different universities. That is that is very disheartening to hear. I know people are very interested in mechanical engineering and medicine and um, IT and things like that. But we will be lost in the sauce if we don't have our understand our history.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll be able to be manipulated by others, and it's really not good. So
Again, I can't emphasize this enough. It's not subtle like what we find in the scholarship. It's not subtle. Just to give you an example of what I'm talking about is Carlo Conti Rossini describes the faith of Ethiopians being barbaric, uncritical, and superstitious. And this was in the 1930s. But what is surprising is this article was republished in another journal in 2016, I believe. Cultures and Languages of Near East, uh, Near East Ethiopian, by Alexander Browsey. This same article, that sentence is in it. And what is disappointing about this journal is there's about 15 or 16 articles, and none of them are authored about Ethiopia by Ethiopians. Clearly, this journal was supposed to kind of capture the state of the art of Ethiopian studies in 2016 or whenever it was published. 16 articles, not one written by Ethiopians. Clearly, in over 100, 200 years since Ethiopic studies has been going on, Ethiopians had something to contribute to Ethiopian history research at the research level. Surely. And surely we can do better than Ethiopians' faith is barbaric, uncritical, and superstitious. We can do better than that. And again, these are not articles that are popping up from 50 years ago that we're digging through, but this is a republished journal that was once written in 1930. So this is a problem. And students, first year students of Ethiopic studies, they read this. They read this. And unless they have a wider knowledge of Africa and are able to decipher, okay, this is not, I shouldn't take this part seriously. I should take this part seriously. Then, hey, maybe that is authoritative. It says it. I'm gonna believe it, right? So, anyway, it's a problem. It's a
it's a
problem.
serious problem. So the program, the Ethiopic Studies program at Howard, at Catholic University, that's a part of which department? Is it part of religion department?
Semitics.
Semitic studies?
Hmm.
Okay. So, even the designation of Semitic sometimes can be tricky because it does involve inside of Africa and outside of Africa
And
as
and and,
well.
and
But
you hit a very important point, which is historically Ethiopia has been under Near East programs.
yeah,
So they're studied alongside of Egypt, Yemen, and stuff like that. And historically, they have not been studied under Africa or African studies. And my thing is, the last time I checked, Ethiopia was in Africa. So why is it not under African studies programs? So when what you do is when you put it under Near East, and Edward Said speaks about this. In fact, I have a quote from him where he talks about the Near East program, or known as Orientalism. He says, once we begin to think of Orientalism as a kind of Western projection onto and will to govern over the Orient, which is the East, like Ethiopia's and the Levant, we will encounter few surprises, right? So there's this tradition of coupling these the Eastern countries together by Westerners in order to project their ideas on it. And I'm arguing, I think Ethiopian studies should kind of respectfully be under African studies so it can be studied by Africans. Of course, others can join as well, but I would like to see more Ethiopians in Ethiopian studies, more Africans in African studies. It makes sense, but in fact, uh, that's not the case, and that is disappointing. I think Ethiopians have something to contribute.
Wow, that's amazing. We're going to get into these questions. We're going to get into these questions, and it makes sense. As right now, I'm applying. I'm looking to apply for PhD programs to study ancient African history, and I'm trying to figure out which are the best ones. I'm finding that a lot of these programs they don't even have African history as a concentration.
Mhm, mhm.
So that's unfortunate, but we'll do the best we can. I'll find something that works. We have a question from Stacy Jackson, and she says, "Why do you feel that the one group is operating out of ignorance?" You know how you mentioned the yeah, you know what she's
Yeah,
talking.
over the years, I've become friends with some of them. Uh, I've been told not to mention names, but one, he was a professor of mine. I've talked to him. He has the cleanest heart. He wants to learn, and I've worked with another professor, and I think I could say her name, Wendy Belcher, is very keen on understanding, like, she wants to learn, like, what should I do to learn about the society. So she's not telling me what the society is, she wants to learn from it. And I think I want to see scholars doing that, right? Like really listening to, okay, what is the Ethiopian tradition like before I write about it, before I publish. Tell me about the society, right? uh I'll give you one example that really threw me off. There was this one article that was talking about the relationship between Muslims and Christians, and it really kind of shocked me. At the end, it talked about the Muslims and the Christians, and there's been conflict here and there. But then they said the Christians do not accept the Muslims in Ethiopia as their fellow countrymen. They do not accept them as their fellow countrymen, and that's just not true. There are many, like, friends and family members. I got a couple of buddies whose mom is Muslim and their father is Christian. Some people even consider themselves both. They have no problem going to a church on Sunday and doing Ramadan when the month comes, right? So, like, this is just not understanding the society. Now, it's not just wrong, but it's dangerous, because right now we happen to be at a conflict where there are many ethnic divisions and fights and wars, and including religious conflicts between Christians and Muslims. So now, with the history department gone and the philology department being the only thing that can supply any type of knowledge into the society, you have articles such as this, which is incorrectly uh kind of portraying the society entering the land. So now, if someone is angry, or just a youth who'd go to school in the philology department comes across this article, they're going to believe it as the authoritative source, and think, I didn't know my fellow Christian doesn't like me. I didn't know he doesn't think I'm Ethiopian. And then further conflict could arise. So I think this is a major problem, and some want to learn and some don't, and they continue to go in the direction that they're going. And that's why I say there's some out of, like, just not knowing, and they want to learn, and some they don't want to learn. And
Mm,
that's the last thing I would say, a buddy of mine told me this, and this is perhaps the worst category, is the performative ones. There's this, we will look, we care about Ethiopia, and then, they bring some Ethiopian food and stuff and say, look, we're working with the community to understand them. No, like, let's not do performative. Let's do real change, real conversations about how to gear scholarship that's healthy, that's accurate, and that's not dangerous, right? And many people are not willing to have that conversation, surprisingly. And
mm,
that's kind of when I was, I personally don't see myself being part of the Ethiopic studies program, but why I gravitated towards the African studies program, where
mhm.
you don't have to explain issues like colonialism and racism and things like that, right? And I feel like you already start from that direction. Like you don't need to explain racism to African study students and faculty members, which
No,
is important when you're doing these type of studies.
no. So we have you don't have to explain. We got two other questions up here. Send your questions in if you have any. Here, this is a comment, and you may want to touch on it. It says oppressive systems, methods, and processes continue to to continue the divide and conquer agenda. When I look at how resilient plants grow through cement, I wonder how these systems can be forever destroyed.
Mm. Um, yeah, I don't know. That's a tough question. I think to me, education is key. And that's why I wrote this book, hoping to get people to read and understand. Look, I gave a sermon once, and I said, look, I don't have a problem having an ethnic fight. That's not my problem. My problem is, but if I'm gonna have an ethnic war, I want to have it because I decided to have it, right? I don't want to have an ethnic war because someone is using me as a puppet, and dictating what I should do based on manipulation and misrepresentation of scholarship. And that's essentially what's happening right now. Like, we should at least have the ability to have that decision to say we're going to go to war or not. Right now, it's based on misinformation that people are angry at one another. It's false information, misinformation, and I think one way that you can tackle it is through education. You teach the person, look, you're shouldn't be fighting this person. You actually have a lot more in common than you think, right? You have a lot more in common with this person than you think. So I don't know how to completely wipe it off, but I think part of what we can do is educate and educate strongly. And the other thing is, we should hold people responsible for making dangerous comments. Like, you can't walk around saying Christians don't accept Muslims as their fellow countrymen in Ethiopia. Like, that's just not okay to say, right? It creates many problems. And I think these so called scholars should be held accountable. And unfortunately, there's no one to hold them accountable. And, that's the problem. If you want a job in this industry, then you have to get along with senior members. And the senior members, unfortunately, some of them, not all of them, some of them have very uh, some mindset that's not healthy. So what do? If you speak up, you kind of destroy your career. So many are afraid and are keeping quiet.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we're happy you're speaking up, man. Sankofa Video and Books is definitely the place to speak up and speak out. Don't forget that you all can purchase the book online, sankofa.com, or you can just come into the store and pick up a copy. We're open till 8 p.m. Um, we're open 7 days a week. Just we close at 6 on Sundays. We open 10 a.m. in the morning. And the cafe is open from 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. every day. So come get some coffee, get something to eat, hang out. You can study. Here we have a question from Milan Mahari. Um, she has her question is Salam. Incredible conversation, you both. Thank you. Question: Do you how do you incorporate spirituality and history in the book and in your work? Peace.
Yeah, I'm calling for forgiveness. I dedicate a whole chapter to. You could even call it a sermon of a call for just take your time out and say, hey, what am I doing before I respond in a certain way, especially online, and some of the very like nasty comments that happen. I'm surprised that after the wake of bullying and how damaging it could be, online bullying, and how damaging it could be to society, to see people um uh, say such things. A lot of people are responding strongly because they believe they're achieving some type of humanitarian goal. But humanitarian means to care about humanity. So you can't be a kind of a an advocate for the humanitarian cause and like fight with your neighbor. It doesn't work that way. Humanitarian means to care about humanity all across you. And you might disagree with the person next to you, but you still have to care for them and be nice to them and things like that. So in my book, I do kind of spend a chapter just to get people to think about some of the things that they're doing. And peace is it requires some work. Actually, if I could read just a small portion of a section after I talk about colonization, the effects it had in Western scholarship. Um, I say, it is with a heavy heart I report that Ethiopia has, in fact, been colonized. So, one of the things we talk about is Ethiopia has never been colonized, it has never been colonized, but I say it has been colonized. Not in the conventional sense, wherein the foreigners penetrate through the land and govern the people. No, in that sense, the foreigners were unsuccessful. Instead, they were able to penetrate and govern our minds. The colonizers had a mission to divide and conquer. Although they have now passed on, their ideals live on, and they continue to live because we give them all the nutrition necessary to survive. You see, friends, colonization ideas receive their nutritions from division, separation, hate, anger, and the like. Each time we fight each other, we give life to the ideas of the dead. Each time we turn on each other, we are allowing the tools of colonization to take roots.
Mm.
So again, like let us take a step back and understand what we are doing. We think we're defending a tribe, but really we're continuing the legacy of what these fascists kind of um placed in our minds.
Wow, this is a wonderful conversation, and very very timely. Um, did you have? I'm kind of speechless at the moment now. Oh no, I know what I wanted to say. I'm back at where I wanted to say. Now, throughout the whole book, you use the metaphor of a husband and a wife, and you also often talk about your own desires for marriage and to have a wife. If and when you wrote the book, you weren't married. If I'm not mistaken, you recently get married,
I got engaged.
engaged,
Yeah.
recently engaged. So congratulations
Thank
on
you
the
so much. Thank you.
engagement. And I guess how has you thinking about this book in the sense of a hopeless romantic, and did that have anything to play? Did that affect you? And how you found your fiance at all?
Absolutely. I'll say that I don't know if she's gonna get mad at me for saying this, but my goal was
Blame me if you trust that. Don't get mad at him.
my goal was, so in the book I say I want to find the one. All right, thank you so much. I see the congratulations coming in. My goal was so in the book I talk about finding my love. I always think about the one I'm gonna marry and all this stuff. And my goal was to propose to her by the end of the book, but in our relationship we just weren't there yet to propose. So I ended up proposing a few months after the book. But what I did was, in the book there's like some messages I kind of left for her. Like her name is Tigist. Tigist. So in Mark or in English it means patience. So I use the word patience a lot, as it's just a little tribute for her. And
That's
I also gave an acknowledgement section using her alias name. We in the church we have a secondary name that we're known as, and I said Sarguta Mariam is her name, so I give an acknowledgement there. But it also helped because it just, like I said, but by the way, the reader shouldn't be lost in the metaphor that love is that one element that unites everyone. Everyone understands love. I don't care what language you speak. I don't care what where you were born or what your cultural background is. Everyone understands love. So this book being about love, I'm hoping can unite all of us and help us remember, like, these are virtues that we could all remember. And as I'm writing it, I'm kind of allowing myself to kind of swim in this sea of romantic, kind of, passionate love that I had at the moment, that allowed me to write a little bit romantically, or I think I did, I don't know. But
No, you did. You definitely did. Definitely did. Um, any more questions? People throw your questions in the chat. I have a question.
sure.
Um, clearly, this book is definitely intended for Ethiopians in the diaspora, the Ethiopian community. And you did allude to broader appeal for African studies and African history. What can others who are not necessarily members of the Ethiopian community, what can they gain from reading this book, and what would be their interest?
Sure, I think they can gain understanding of the world, broader perspective. I think, uh, I don't want to be rude here, but American, growing up in American education systems, you have very kind of narrow perspective of the world, right? And it helps. People don't know a lot about Africa, and people don't know a lot about Ethiopia, and it serves to know the world that we live in, especially when we were being connected throughout the world and all this. So I think it's beneficial. Also, this is kind of a, a a a point to take up, right? A cause to take up. I think there's an element of injustice in this, especially the way that it's our history has been hijacked. And I was very, um I don't know if I should get into this, but I always get myself into trouble. So, when the war in Ethiopia was happening, people called it a political, like, war, and nobody really wanted to talk about this. And then, when other wars in Europe, let's say, is happening, everybody's like on top of it, and worried about the people that are dying. Like, the blood that's shed in Africa, it's still, those are people. They're mothers that cry after that. They're brothers so I think there's a cause to take up in this, and the issue of Africa really can be mitigated when we begin to address these higher institutions that are in power but are exacerbating some of the problems. So I think by raising awareness, I'm hoping that someone out there would hear this and take it up as a cause, and take it a little bit more seriously. So I think that will be a win for me. If someone out there is just interested, and maybe in their work they could be a little bit more cautious about race issues and things like that, I think that's a win.
Yes, yes, I totally agree. We are coming to towards the end of our conversation. Thank you, Miles. He said this was a great conversation. Great job to you both. Yeah, we are coming around the close of our conversation, but what I wanted to give you an opportunity to let people know where they can find you. I mentioned that you had a YouTube video that and some YouTube videos, so some of those were very educational. I just wanted to let the people know where they can find you. If you have any other writings, your other books, things like that.
Sure. I also have a book, I Need Answers. This is for the youth, but also anyone interested about the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, what we teach, and that sort of stuff. You can find it on Amazon. I also have a website, dawitmuluneh.com, and you can see some of my sermons and my teachings, some of my works on there as well. And then, if you're really interested about what is the Ethiopian Orthodox Water Church, what do they teach, I do serve with a youth group known as YOTC, and you can find our work there on yotc.org. And again, thank you so much. So humbling to be here. I'm a huge fan of Sakonfa. So once again, thank you for putting this together.
Yeah, and hopefully we can work something out to where we can get your other book so that folks can opt out of the other option that they have, and they can choose the option that's going to serve them and not just serve themselves. But we know how it is. You gotta get things out there, and we're in the world, so we understand. Um, so I would like to thank everyone. I want to thank Deacon Dawid Muluneh. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your labor of love with this book. Um, I've gotten into it. Haven't finished it yet, but I love the writing. There's a lot of images in there, pictures. He uses humor as well. It's very intelligent, but it's also very readable. And I mention this as a person who wears glasses. I have my contacts in now, but the type, the print, whoever printed this, they printed it such a great size and font that it's a very easy read. You know, you pick up some books and they're just you're like, why is this wording so small, or why did you choose this font? But with this one, you don't have anything to worry about with that. So you'll truly enjoy it. So Sankofa.com, you can go purchase Hopeless Romantic, or you can come into the store. We're right here on Georgia Avenue, right across from Howard University. Um, so come holler at us. Go to our website, Sankofa.com. Follow us at Sankofa DC on all platforms. And yeah, we are done at this point.